year, new me, we're unhauling some books. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is For a Pause in a Book. I make bookish videos over here in my little corner of the internet, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below. When I went through my entire physical TBR, I decided to do a little bit of a culling, and today we are going to be unhauling a bunch of books. I have these broken up into genre, and so I'll have timestamps down below if you just want to watch a certain portion of it. And then all of these books are listed on my Pango. I am filming this a little bit early, so they may not all still be there. Go ahead and check it out. I'm also going to be doing a 10% off discount for all orders that are placed in the next week after this video is going out. With that said, let's start with some nonfiction, because I only have a couple there. Both of these books I have read, I just don't want to keep them on my shelf anymore. I have a very, very small section for nonfiction, and so if I don't plan on rereading them, then I usually unhaul them, let them find a new home. So first up we have Disfigured on fairy tales, disability, and making space. This is a collection of essays talking about how disabled characters in fairy tales usually end up as the villains or the bad guys, or they're like heavily disfigured. Like, think of like Hunchback of Notre Dame, when in reality disabled people are looking for themselves in the protagonist representation. And it was a really, really interesting collection of essays and thesis project. I'm just not going to read it anymore. I probably won't give a ton of explanation as to why I'm not going to be reading them. The honest truth is that I'm running out of space on my shelves. And so some of these books I have read and I'm not going to reread them, and I think that they'll find better homes. Other ones have just been sitting on my shelves for entirely too long. Also have I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. I really, really enjoyed this one. I read this one December of 2022. It's hard to say last year now because it's not true. And this was a really, really interesting conversation about being Black in the church space. And this one had some very poignant conversation pieces. Okay, now I have a few sci-fi books. I have this duology, The Final Six and The Life Below by Alexandra Monier. This was a really interesting YA sci-fi duology about the Earth, like a climate fiction book in which the Earth is dying, and so they have chosen 6 young people to go to one of Jupiter's moons. This one ends on such a cliffhanger, so you got to get this one immediately after. And it was really fun. Like, it's kind of one of those like sci-fi thriller aspects. You have to suspend your disbelief quite a bit for it, like in the fact of like, why are 18-year-olds the smartest option for this in the first place? But it was a fun time. And then I'm also going to be unhauling The Sound of Stars and The Kindred by Alicia Dow. These are really beautiful, like cozy sci-fi romances. There's a lot of queer and ace representation in them. And this one made my best books of the year that I read it. I'm not going to reread them. They're a little bit younger YA for me, and they'll go to a better home than just sitting on my shelf. And then I'm gonna unhaul The Martian. I read this years ago. I actually enjoyed it, but Andy Weir is probably not the author for me. Like, this is the only book of his I have liked. So it's kind of just like sitting alone on my shelf and doesn't have its companions because I already unhauled the other 2. Okay, let's do the horror. I'm just kind of basically working my way up to the romance and fantasy because those are the 2 largest categories of things that I'm unhauling. I'm unhauling The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torr. This is one of the very first books that I ever bought when I started BookTube, and I've had it since then. It's survived several unhauls somehow, but it's not a book that I'm gonna read anytime soon. Also, I can't get these stickers off, so the cover is ugly. I have Bring Me Back by B.A. Paris. This is a like domestic thriller. I read it in November, I believe, and it was fine. It's a book that existed. I have The Counselors by Jessica Goodman. This is a YA thriller that I bought for a project and then ended up scrapping it. It was one of those books that, like, if you bought something else at Barnes & Noble, this one was only $5, and so I fell for that, and then I was like, oh, I could do something. I was gonna do something I think for Amazing Readathon, and I know that I'm not going to now. I have Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Powers. I actually really, really liked this one. I think I gave it 5 stars, and it was kind of this quiet horror, just like very atmospheric, very spooky, which is my kind of horror. I'm just not gonna reread it. 2 books that I read for my Choose Your Own Adventure spooky vlog. Breathless by Amy McCullough is like this Snowden thriller, and then Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus. These books were fine. They were interesting. They actually both were the ones that won that round, but I'm not going to reread them. And they're still in pretty good condition, so I'll be able to sell them on Pango. I have My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I really liked this book, but I don't know that I want to continue on in the series, and so because of that, I'm not going to keep this book. Like, I think it was fine as a standalone. So I'm just gonna like I'm not going to continue the series. Stephen Graham Jones has been super hit or miss for me as an author, and so I kind of just want to end it on a high note with that series because I'm afraid that I won't like the next one. I have The Whisper Man by Alex North. I read this a couple years ago, and like it's just sat on my shelf collecting dust. And my like horror shelf here for my like tall horror books is almost out of room. So I had to part with some. And then The Pledge by Cale Dietrich. This was a fun queer slasher, but I'm not going to reread it, and it's taking up space on my shelf, and someone else will enjoy it more. A couple of like miscellaneous, like 2 contemporaries and 1 historical. The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. I read this in last January, and I thought it was actually really interesting, but again, I'm not going to reread it. It doesn't need to sit on my shelf. I don't really have a place for historical fiction anymore. And then An American Marriage by Tiare Jones. I got this in a blind date with a book for a video that's exclusive to my Patreon right now, because it was for the Taylor Swift Reputation album that I thought was going to get announced back in November, and then it wasn't. So I did a whole vlog for it, but then I clowned, and so it's just exclusive on my Patreon. But I did read this, and I enjoyed it. And then Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. Also read this for a Taylor Swift vlog, but that one is public, where I read books that like Taylor Swift had mentioned in articles or interviews and stuff like that, and this was one of them. Okay, now let's move into the romance. I think almost every single one of these I have read, and they've just been fine. And again, my romance shelves are running out of room, so we had to you know, we had to make some cuts. Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I like her new stuff, like her more like lit fic / historical fiction stuff, but not necessarily her contemporary romances. And then Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. I read this book last year for a Goodreads video, and it was fine, but I'm not gonna reread it. I have One to Watch by Kate Stamen London. I don't remember what project I read this for, but I read it like a year and a half ago. It's been sitting on my shelf, and for a 3.5 star book to sit on my shelf for that long, this is a book that exists. And then A Holly Jolly Diwali by Sanya Lali. I actually did not get to this one, but I wanted to read it in December and didn't get a chance to. And like now I'm holiday romanced out, and I don't think that I will, like this one has like kept going down to my basement every single year after the holidays, and so I think I'm just gonna part with it. And then I'm getting rid of like the hardback versions of the Kiss Quotient series. This is the whole trilogy from Book of the Month. I don't like my romances in hardcover anymore, and so I might try to find these again in paperback. But again, I have read this whole series, and I don't foresee myself rereading them at any point. And the audios are on Hoopla if I want to. Okay, fantasy time. A couple of Spiffbo books from Spiffbo 8 that I had purchased. A Song for the Void by Andrew C. Piazza, The Umbral Storm by Alec Hudson, and Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons. This one I kept for so long because the cover is so adorable. It looks like a cute little book, but I gave this book 2 stars. Like, I don't need to keep this book. I'm not going to continue the series. If you're like a cozy fantasy lover, if you like Legends and Lattes and that series, this might be perfect for you, but it was not for me. I am unhauling Raybearer and Redemptor by Jordan Flecko. I started reading this. I got about 25% of the way into it and then decided to DNF it. The writing style just wasn't working for me, and so I'm going to unhaul both of them. I'm unhauling Small Angels by Lauren Owen. I had high hopes for this one when I picked it up at Book of the Month, but since then I've seen a few people that have similar reading tastes to me read like 20 pages and then DNF because the writing style wasn't working. So I read the first chapter and also had the same problem. So just gonna let it go. I am unhauling Wild as the Witch by Rachel Griffin. I also unhauled The Nature of Witches, but I already sold that one. But this is like a beautiful, beautiful book. But it's YA, like cozy fantasy, and that's not what I read anymore. So it probably wouldn't get rated very highly even if I did read it, but it's been sitting on my shelf for so long. I'm unhauling The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman. I read this one as part of my like read or unhaul self-destruct vlog, actually last like 2022, and actually really liked it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna see if I can find the second book. And then I never looked for the second book. So that tells me that I wasn't necessarily very invested in the series. I'm unhauling Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I kept this book for so long because, listen, it's gorgeous. It's one of the Barnes & Noble exclusive editions. It's beautiful, but I think I only gave this book like 3.5 stars. It's a wonderful book. if you are the right target audience for it. I'm not. I highly recommend the book. It's just not necessarily, like, I'm not the target audience for it anymore, so I could let it sit on my shelf and collect dust, or I could get it into the hands of somebody who would really enjoy it. I'm going to Unhaul Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. I read this one this summer, really enjoyed it, but I know that the second one nobody likes, and so I'll just pretend it's a standalone and we'll go from there. I'm unhauling Air Awakens by Elise Kova. Read this one earlier in December and really didn't like it. I read it for a Romantasy vlog and I'll probably read the rest on KU, or at least continue like into the second book, see if I like that one a little bit more. But yeah, I didn't like this one. I am unhauling The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson. This is a dark fae retelling of The Nutcracker, and it was fine. I read this one like on Christmas Day, and I think like outside of Christmas, this book doesn't really make sense. It just kind of encapsulated this dark, moody vibe that I was going for on Christmas Day. That sounds depressing. My Christmas is done on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day is a quiet, nice, cozy day for me. And so I read this whole entire book. If it wasn't Christmas Day and I wasn't like drinking hot cocoa and like having a whole like aesthetic for myself that day, I don't think I would have liked it as much as I did. And I only gave it 3 stars. I'm unhauling A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw because A, it's a St. Martin's title and I can't make content around it right now, and B, it's been sitting on my shelf for so long. This one's gonna hurt a couple of people, but the sequel to this book has been sitting on my shelf since publication day. And I haven't read it, and I haven't wanted to read it, and a lot of people got confused, but when they jump into the second book, if you hadn't read the first book recently, and I haven't read it in 2.5 years, 3 years at this point maybe, so I'm just gonna unhaul Legendborn and Bloodmarked. So sorry to any of you who loved this. I really liked this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I read it in January of 2021. So like, I don't remember anything that happened in this book, and I couldn't just jump into this. So I'm just gonna let them go. And then 2 more. I've got The Ravens by Cass Morgan. This is like a YA dark academia story, and that just doesn't intrigue me at all. And then The Wild Ones by Nafisa Azad. I've just had this one on my shelf for a long time, and I think that it's not going to vibe with my reading taste. So we're just gonna let it go and let it find a better home. That's all the books that I'm going to unhaul today. It's like 40 something, I think, at this point. They might still be up on Pango, but like I said, I am filming this a little bit early so that I can get them like posted and then put down in my basement, which is where all of my Pango stuff goes. But that's all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there is a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!